Good evening. My name is Virginia Stoymenoff, and we're here today at the Canadian Macedonian Historical Society Library. The date is Thursday, July the 13th, and we're pleased to do an interview today with our very good Macedonian friend, Mary Kondoff. Hello, Mary.
Pleased to be here. Thank you.
Mary, you've had a very interesting life, so let's start way back at the beginning.
Way back in the beginning.
Tell me first where you were born and when.
I was born in Toronto, Ontario, November the 27th, 1923.
And so you're a first-generation Canadian.
First-generation Canadian.
Tell us about who your parents were and your grandparents, where they're from.
My grandparents, I never did know. They were in Aegean, Macedonia, and my parents arrived in this country in 1920 and mother in 1921. And they had a very difficult time. Dad arrived in New York, and from New York came to Toronto. And he was here for a couple of years working to bring my mother over here as his wife-to-be.
Did he have people here that he came to be with? Or?
No, he didn't have people here. He struggled and found work in restaurants or wherever he could find work, and he worked in General Steelwares. They were located on River Street at the time, because it was pointed out to me at one time we drive by and Dad would say, I used to work there when I was a young man. And finally he brought Mother over in 1922 through Ellis Island in the United States and then to New York. And Father, they hired a judge to marry them, but my mother didn't feel she was married. She had to come to Toronto and get married by a church minister to feel married, which he did. 3 days later they were in Toronto and he bought a house. And in those days, $300 down payment was sufficient for a house.
Where was that house?
And that house was at 98 Mulock Avenue in the Junction.
There were a lot of Macedonians there.
Ah, a great deal of Macedonians there. And I was raised there until my 7th year, and so was my brother. My brother was born in 1926. And then we moved to the Danforth-Coxwell area here in Toronto, where Dad opened a restaurant.
What was it called?
And it was called the Tulip Lunch.
Oh.
And Mother...
Was that on Danforth at Coxwell?
Right at Danforth, on Danforth at Coxwell. And they struggled very hard raising us. And my brother and I, from time to time, would go into the restaurant and help. If we were told to peel a sack of potatoes, we'd peel them and no talk back. And going in, having breakfast there, we lived about 10 doors away from the restaurant. And we'd do whatever chores my brother and I were handed out to do before we went to school, and reported back after school. And the teachers came in at noon hour and ate their lunches there, so we had to be on our best behavior.
What kind of social activities did your parents do when you were little? When they first came here, what was, they must have talked about what they did at that time.
Well, there was the formation of the Andrew Christoph Club on Ontario Street. Mr. Duffeff.
But this was later, though.
This was around that time. I was about 8, 9 years old, I would say, when we started the music field on the violin with Mr. Duff at. And then they found there were quite a few young people in Toronto that were about in the bracket of 14, 15-year-olds. There was a group of Macedonians got together and bought a building on Ontario Street, and it was 386 Ontario Street. And this was reason enough for the formation of the Andrew Christoph Club with the young people. And the choirs developed, the orchestra developed, and many other things started to develop.
But there was another club before 386 Ontario Street, wasn't there?
There may have been, because I had got involved with the Ukrainians on Royce Avenue at the time prior to the Andrew Christoph Club.
You played violin?
The violin with the group.
Yeah. And Christoph was the one that taught that group as well, I think.
Yes, Mr. Duffett did.
Yes.
Yes, he was at both places.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Did you play the violin for long?
Well, I played it for 14, 15 years.
You still play
And
today?
I haven't picked it up for a number of years, but I was getting ready to go to the Vienna Festival. I was 15 at the time, and I was going to play in concert in a festival in Vienna, and unfortunately I fell down the stairs. That was my first year of high school, and I broke my left arm, which threw my vibrato and everything else all off. That I was in a deep state of depression at the time.
Oh, so you couldn't go.
I couldn't go.
Oh, awful.
Mm-hmm. It was pretty grim for a young girl at that time. I was very disappointed. So my dad more so, and my mother too as well.
So tell us a little bit about the early beginnings that you remember of the club. Your father was very active there, I know.
Yes, my father was active there, and the ladies' auxiliary my mother was, and I can remember some of the ladies, Mrs. Paskaloff, and
was there a president of the ladies group then?
yes, Stanka was president of the ladies group.
Was she
I
Stanka
remember.
Kolev?
Stanka Kolev.
I thought your mother was too.
Well, mother was 1 year, Stanka Kolev was another year. I can't remember their names offhand.
And your father?
My father participated in collecting monies, going from business to restaurant to businessman, trying to keep the building and payment of the mortgage at 386 Ontario Street. It took a lot of energy, but the people had a lot of energy those days.
Your father had a nickname, I remember.
Yes, he did have a nickname. They called him Shorty.
Chris Shortito.
Chris Shortito, yeah.
That's what I always remember. Everybody referred to him.
Yeah.
Chris
They did.
Shortito.
Chris Shortito, yeah.
He was a
For
nice
sure.
man. Anyway, I'm really interested about this youth group at the club. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Well, the youth club there with the formation of
Were you
Andrew
one of the
Christoph
beginning?
Club.
I guess you weren't one of the founders there. Did you know who the founders were?
I do think Tommy Stoymenoff was in the club at the same time, I believe.
Yeah, but I don't think he was.
Was he
in
not
that
a
group.
member?
Well, maybe, but not in that Andrew Christoph Club. I don't
No?
think.
Well, I thought he was. However, I can't remember. Well, some of the people, I've forgotten their names, even Zilba Georgiev and Victor Paskaloff was around off and on, but I don't know whether he was a member or not. However, it was the Andrew Christoph Club that elected me to go to the World Youth Festival in Prague in Czechoslovakia.
And when was that?
And that was in 1947, when there was 105 young people organized from coast to coast, from Vancouver to Halifax, university students, high school students, and we were 105 young people. We all met in Montreal.
What was the basic group? They weren't ethnic Macedonians or...
No, they were all ethnic, mostly.
Youth.
Youth, for instance, Italian, Ukrainian, French, a couple of Jewish young girls. Every nationality you could think of. There was 2 Spanish girls too in our brigade.
Because it was sponsored by the World Union of Students.
Yes, it was.
Did they have a common thread? What was the reason for this Congress?
This Congress was taking place in Prague in Czechoslovakia. However, we met with the young people in London, England, and we joined up with them and into Paris, and then we picked up with the Paris group, and this was all done by transportation of trains, which was a little dangerous at the time because the war had just been completed, and going through Warsaw in Poland, we were detained there in the trains for about 28 hours, and we were locked in boxcars.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. It was pretty dangerous at the time. We didn't know what was happening.
And this was in the spring, I guess, of 47.
In the spring, yes, spring. Well, no, it was, early May. Because we arrived in Czechoslovakia in June.
And what went on at this festival?
Oh, at the festival, the Congress was at the stadium in Prague. And we stayed at the Roosevelt College. The young people had all gone home to their residences, and we had the students' residence at the Roosevelt College in Prague, in Czechoslovakia. And there were other young people assigned in the same university there at the college, I should say. And the festival started where we marched in their stadium as a Canadian brigade, and we called ourselves the Beavers from Canada, the Canadian Brigade. And we were 105 all told, from all different cities across Canada.
And that's what you were there for, is to...
represent Canada.
And work on this railroad?
And no, the railroad we worked on in Yugoslavia. We worked in Lidice in Czechoslovakia for about 10 days. Lidice was a village where the Germans occupied and killed all the men in the village and the children. They utilized the men, the German army, were using the women, and we went in to help cut timber for building a new village in Lidice. And the women and the young children, the youth, fed us black bread, and they told us we could get white bread for you. But we all worked there for 10 days in Lidice, and we slept in bunks like a barrack, a type of building, and on straw. They didn't have mattresses. And we helped them cut tall timber, and we'd call out Nazda, because there would be 2 people on a saw to cut the timber that were about 12 to 15 inches through the diameter of the tree. And we worked about 11, 12 hours a day till we got very, very tired. They were very surprised.
How old were you?
21.
21. And I guess you saw a lot of the ravages of the war.
We did indeed. Lidice was just smashed right down. The people had nothing. They were just sleeping outside. We felt badly because we lived in a barrack, and they were just sleeping on straw outside, no cover. If it rained, they had no protection.
I still don't understand, this festival was organized by whom?
There was a committee in Montreal and Toronto.
The World Union of Students.
The World Student Union did organize it. And at that time, the Andrew Kristoff Club had contributed $350 for my transportation. It had to be paid in Canada because the money could not be taken out of Canada. And we had to pay for our hotels in London and in Paris prior to departure.
Okay, Mary, I'm trying to find out why this was organized. Was it to try to rebuild all this? Were you supposed to stay there for that length of time to do all these things?
Yes.
So it was all planned ahead?
It was all planned ahead.
And the Beaver Brigade and everything?
The Beaver Brigade took them 2.5 years to organize
Oh, I
it.
see. So that's what I was trying
So,
to get at.
all youth from many countries were there, not just Canada.
So that was the purpose?
That was the purpose.
Okay, that's what I was
To
trying to
help
find what the purpose
build
was.
and give them an honorable living, per se, to have housing. They didn't have it.
So after you were at Lidice, then you went where?
From Lidice, we went to Prague, and they wanted us to have a few days rest, and we had 3 days touring Prague through professors from the college, and they took us around and showed us the sights. It's the most beautiful city, Prague.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic city.
And what was that about the railroads?
The railroads, from there, we went to Yugoslavia to help them build a railroad line. And this railroad line was close to Sarajevo, which today, sorry to say, is in very bad shape. And it wasn't very far outside of Sarajevo where we worked. Brčko Banović, it was a mountain. A hole had to be put into the mountain for the train to go through. And the engineers were there, and we were digging with pick and shovels, picking up rocks and earth, and they decided they'd see who could do the fastest. It was between this Beth, I've forgotten Beth's last name. She was a Jewish gal, and we had a great time helping, and we worked there about 10 hours a day. And again, we met with the Bulgarian Brigade, the Spanish Brigade, the British Brigade, and we taught them how to play baseball.
Oh.
They carved out a stick for a bat, and it really worked. And we had real nice bonfires in the evening, and we had bread and soup every night. It was a fabulous way for youth to get to meet youth from the various countries.
Was this done at any other time? Was it a yearly affair? Or
Yes, it was for a few years.
After this one?
This was the first World Youth Student Festival.
Sounds very interesting.
1947.
It would have been good to continue. I think that's, you're right, it is a wonderful way to get all different nationalities together. So that was your whole summer there of 1947, was it?
Yes, spent in Yugoslavia, and then the brigade left after 30 days on Brčko Banović, and I went to Belgrade and lived with Baba and Dedo Vlakov, who was the vice president of Yugoslavia at the time, and he had a summer home in Varadar, Macedonia, and they took me up to their summer home, and I lived with them there for a little while, and then they went on a vacation for 2 months to Venice, and they left me there with a family. friends of theirs, and this is where I picked up the Macedonian language, primarily speaking it there through their professors. And
Didn't you speak it at home with your parents at all?
oh, I spoke it at home. I think I maybe spoke 20-30% of the language prior to leaving, before I left for Europe.
And then you were totally immersed. For how long were you
Then
there?
I was immersed at 14 months.
In where?
In Belgrade, in Serbia, and spent 9 months in Skopje in Macedonia. At one point, I was teaching the Albanian reporters English once I got used to the Macedonian language. After 6 months I'd been there, I taught them English on standard letter writing for them, how to correspond with other countries. And they were fascinated with a girl who could type without looking at the letters.
Oh.
And then I learned how to type just as fast the Macedonian language, which was very similar, actually. I mean, they thought that was something new, refreshing, had never seen it before, but today it's a forgotten thing with computers today.
Well, they still type. Let's say it's the
Well,
same
at one
keyboard.
time, the same keyboard, but the 80, 90 words a minute
So
has surpassed me now.
What were the Albanians? Where were the Albanians?
There were Albanians working in Macedonia
At that time.
at that time. Now
Well,
that's
but-
1948.
But were they living there, or were they just
No,
there
they
for-
were reporters there, maybe a 2-year stint in Macedonia, and there was 2 Turkish from Istanbul. They had a variety at that time in Skopje. They spoke mostly Serbian. Remember, it's 1947. The war was just over. There was no dictionary yet in
And Macedonia
Macedonia.
hadn't been declared a republic yet.
No, not yet. It was 1948 it was declared a republic.
Yeah.
It was just after I arrived home, it was declared a republic.
Oh.
1948 of...
Well, was there not a lot of talk about it while you were there?
Oh, there was a lot of disruption, and there were many things that were happening there. The Red Dean of Canterbury was at the Hotel Macedonia, where I got invited to meet him because he'd heard of a Canadian girl that was here in Skopje. It was not populated like it is today. And Hotel Macedonia isn't there anymore today, gone with the earthquake.
Oh.
And these things all stand out in my mind. The Red Dean of Canterbury from England invited me to tour with him as an interpreter. He had his own interpreter, but they took me for 5 days. And we went to Bulgaria and to Sofia and came back to Skopje again since he was coming back, and he told me he would be. I enjoyed his company.
You called him the Red Dean of Canterbury.
The Red Dean.
Why?
He was called the Red Dean because he had progressive ideas. He and I made bricks for about an hour right in the square in Macedonia. The young people were making bricks out of mud to rebuild their houses. Macedonia isn't like it is today. It was a hole here, a hole there. It was quite different. I mean, I, being the age I am, had seen all of this, and I had been back in 1985 was my last trip back, and what a difference. It's beautiful to see how it's grown.
So you stayed how long there in Skopje?
Well, in Skopje I was 14 months in Skopje. And then when my parents asked me to come back, I was so I wrote back and told him I wanted to live here, and my father apparently was very upset. And they had to put me on a plane. I wasn't a willing person to come back.
Did you meet anybody there that you wanted to stay?
Yes, I had.
Oh.
I did. And this kind of wanted me to stay there and live there. But my father wouldn't hear of it. So he had somebody come with me on the plane up to Trieste, and they got me on the ship.
Oh.
It's the only way I'd go. However, life goes on.
Yeah, it does. And then you got back here and you settled into a job.
Oh, I came back here and met my parents in Montreal. First of all, I came into New York City with the ship. I must mention this to you because it has some bearing with a few things that happened later in my life. We got off the boat in New York, and I've forgotten his name, Dr. I can't think of his name right offhand. And he was editor of Narodna Volya in Detroit. And it has slipped my mind his name at the moment. But these two people met me in New York, and they had lined up a conference with short notice. I could not sleep on land. I had to go back to the ship and sleep, and the authorities made sure I came back to the ship.
Oh, I see. They didn't want you to stay in the States.
They didn't want me to stay in the States because they had found out I had worked on the railroad in Yugoslavia. And I'd written a few articles while I was away, and I got branded as a communist. So they called a conference. There was about 200 people in New York. I gave them a little chat for about 40 minutes about my trip and my travels and what I did over in Europe. When I got back on the ship the next day, they wanted me to go to a suburb of New York to speak. They wouldn't let me off the ship. The ship was in for 2 days, you see, into New York. So I had to phone my parents and told them that I was going to be delayed. From New York, they were in Montreal waiting for me. So I couldn't come through New York up to Toronto or Montreal. I had to stay on the ship. So I came by ship to Montreal and was very happy to see my parents. A lot of tears were shared, and my brother and my dad and mother. And I could not believe the change of style of dress when I left. People were wearing long skirts just above the ankles, and when I came back home, people were wearing them about 8 to 10 inches above the knees. So that was one change in fashion that it just got my attention. But however, that I could go into quite lengthily at another time.
So, okay, where were you going from here now? You got back.
I got back to Toronto and met a lot of my friends. Now he's passed away, Victor Mihailov, and Clara, his sister, and a couple of others that met me. Even Louis Evans wasn't married then. And they came up to the house the next day when they heard I was home, and my mother and dad were so happy to know I'm back, and the kids were coming back to the house, and Dad made a comment to me, "Mary, you're speaking broken English." And the odd word I'd say in Serbian that I learned there that my mother couldn't understand. But it took a little while for me to get back into the routine of living like we did here.
So, when you finished high school, did you work?
Oh, I finished I finished my high school and took Shaw's business course. Went to Riverdale Collegiate, and I started to work as a secretary. I went out and made an application at one firm, and I'll say the name of the firm. It was at Simpson's, and I had a shorthand test and business knowledge test, etc. And I came out with a 92% on my test. They asked me to wait, and I waited. And nobody showed. I knocked at the door, and I said, I've been waiting here for, I was told about my results. Do I have the job or don't I have? Well, no, you don't have the job. Your name ends in an EFF for Mary Vasilev, and we don't hire ethnic people.
Oh.
So I came home quite upset, told my father what happened. And my mother said, let Mary work on the restaurant, forget it working down into the business world. And I guess the horns grew in my head, and I was going to defy them. So Dad took me to a lawyer, and we went to this lawyer, and we changed my name to Vassal. And we dropped the EFF. And he did the same for my brother soon after. I went and applied again for another job, and I could have worked at Simpson's, and I told them to stick the job and walked out very happily. Those things with foreigners didn't go by very nicely in my days of a young girl. And then I went to the CPR, and I started in at the CPR, and I started to work there as stenographer, secretary, and then I wanted to go into the telegram room, and but Mary, you're taking, you're degrading yourself. And I said, I want to go in there to work. Well, we don't know what to do with you. And I said, well, let me work in there for a month. If I don't like it, you can have me back here in the secretarial end of it again. But I stayed there. I didn't want to go back in their office, and a lot of office politics, and I enjoyed taking the telegrams. At that time is what they were called.
And what was it called?
The telegrams.
Oh.
If now today you've got voice, you've got email,
yeah.
You've got everything, but then I'd get the fax from the Hialeah racetrack, and he'd get on that blower and give it to me, and I'd type as fast as he could talk. But I enjoyed talking to people.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, what happened after that? You're still not married at this
Well,
point.
at that point I wasn't married, but Pete started to pursue me very...
How did you meet Pete?
A concert in Detroit. I played a concert in Detroit, and I met him there when I was quite a bit younger. And
A concert with the orchestra?
No, not with the orchestra. It was a violin festival. And I was asked if I'd like to participate. And at this time, I was getting the violin back into my system again. And I went down there and played at a concert, just as a number for them, not any competition. And Pete was a singer. And Pete sang some songs, and I met all the Kondoffs there, and it was pursued from then on. He'd come weekends to Toronto, because he had his aunt, the Pandals, in Toronto.
Oh.
So this is how our love affair got started.
And when did you get married?
We got married in October of 1949, and got married in Detroit, and I was kicked out in February the 11th of 1950.
What for?
What for? Because I was a communist, supposedly.
And how did they come to that decision?
Well, the decision was they bribed my mother and dad at the border to get me to come to the border to get them. I came to the border to get them, and I was in my slippers and my coat when Dad phoned me from Detroit border to come and get him. They want you here, Mary, before they'll let me come over. So Pete and I raced down to the immigration and at the border, and then I got interrogated there for 4.5 hours, half the night. And I never did get back to Detroit.
But I don't understand. What you said that they bribed your parents?
They bribed my dad to phone me to come down.
Well, why? What?
Well, I don't
who?
know.
Who
The
bribed?
immigration.
But what, how could they bribe him with what?
Well, they wouldn't let him come over, and they said, Mary, they won't let me come over till you come down. So I came down to the border. And
But
I
he wasn't
never
an
got back.
accomplice to them to
Oh,
get you.
wow. Dad wasn't aware of what was happening.
No, I wouldn't think so.
No, he wasn't.
So you went to the States and you married Pete there and you lived there for
Yeah, a few months. And then we tried to see what was happening in Washington. Pete went to Washington, stayed there for about 10 days, and a lawyer advised us, don't waste your money, Chris. Mary's been branded. And there's a few people here in the city that just have a dislike for her, and they've branded her.
Okay, now what I really wanted to get at is the activities that you did that branded you as a communist.
The articles I wrote while I was in Europe, because I praised Yugoslavia, the things the young youth were doing, and they had a file on me, it was about an inch thick. And were asking me if this was Mr. Spiro Basil was one, Mr. Palmeroff was one, and they had pictures of me, and then they started to ask, did you write this article? And I said to him, if you've got 2 eyes in your head and can read, I guess. Well, is it you? I says, well, I don't know. What do you think? Oh, I was a rebel in my young days. Today I'm subdued a bit.
So then there were other things that happened in 1950. I think that was about when the McCarthy era was
Well,
beginning.
the McCarthy, that's when it was beginning. 1950 of January, February. Because there were 3,000 people barred. Ruth Budd was one of them from the Toronto Symphony. They wouldn't let her cross the border.
Yeah.
So she never got over the border. She went and joined the Vancouver Symphony.
Mm-hmm. So there were about 6 of them from the Toronto Symphony.
Yeah, there were about, I understand there's about 11 of them from the symphony. And, that fat-headed one, he was behind it all, a conductor, we found out years later.
Sir Ernest McMillan, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Sir Ernest McMillan.
Yeah.
He was behind it all.
There was, you didn't come back to Toronto though, did you?
I came back to Toronto after we stayed 2 nights in Windsor. And Father said, Mary, look, we stayed there at the Prince Hotel. And we came back. And Pete went back to his school, because Pete was going to school, getting his mechanical degree, and working as a taxi cab driver at night.
Where?
In Detroit. So,
but you were married then, but you were not
we
living
were
there.
married then, but I wasn't living there, no. And after 6 months, I had got a job. I went back to the CPR, wanted me back there gladly, and I went back and worked there for about 4 months. Then we decided to go and live in Windsor. So we bought a house in Windsor and sold our house in Detroit, and we came to Windsor and we lived there 5 years. Well, Pete finished his degree and he worked on aeronautics. He had a fairly good job in Detroit. And I worked in real estate in Detroit, in Windsor at the time.
In real estate? What
In
did you
real
do?
estate, in the office, and then I worked for Toledo Scales. I had 2 jobs while in Windsor.
So he crossed the border every night.
Yes.
And what else are you going to tell us after you moved to Well, when did you move to Toronto?
We moved to Toronto in 1954. We moved to Toronto and bought a house in Scarborough at that time. And the reason, too, we moved to Toronto, Pete was very asthmatic, and the doctors in Detroit advised him Toronto would be a better climate for him, which we did, and we established ourselves here in Toronto, and he's felt better here than when he lived in Detroit.
And what else?
Well, after
what
that,
kind of activities did you participate in with the Macedonian community here?
after that, the formation of a few people got together in 1959 and wanted to have a community center. Well, it was expensive to have a community center. It would be cheaper to build a church. So Pete and I were on the founding committee of St. Clement's Orthodox Church to have a place for the Macedonians to meet and celebrate their religious occasions.
And by this time the club had disbanded.
The club had disbanded. The young people were here and there all over the different communities, and who married into the States, who went out west. It was like it is today.
Well, with the McCarthy vendettas that were going on, that everybody was afraid to go to the club, and the membership just dropped.
Exactly. Exactly.
So you're right, the Macedonians really needed something to
keep
them
themselves together, and this was the next best thing.
So you were with the, you joined the United Macedonians, was it?
Oh, the United Macedonians. My father was a founding member there, and so was my husband Pete, and I got involved into it as well. And United Macedonians started to form quite a strong background as a Macedonian community.
When did they start? When did that?
The late 59, beginning of 60. The United Macedonians. They started in around that time.
Do you remember some of the people that were founders then?
Yes, sure. Spiro and Paul Basil, Costa Andrews was in then at the time, Van Petrov, Teli Moriovcha was in then, Steve, you don't know this Steve Todorovsky, he died. There was two Steve Todorovskys, but they're both dead now. I can't remember more or less who they all are, but they were a strong force in getting things started here in the city. Mm-hmm. And helping with the establishing of the St. Clement Church.
So when was that started, the church? When did they start that?
Well, my husband Pete was on the building committee. 1960 the lot was purchased. 1963 the foundation of the church went in. And we had all kinds of concerts and bazaars took place over at the Flemington Park. The ladies had a ladies' auxiliary. We were meeting in houses. We didn't have a church to meet in. So from house to house, every month the ladies had meetings, and many a time they were in my home in Scarborough.
Where did you live in Scarborough?
Well, I lived on Ellendale Drive at 132 Ellendale.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. We had a nice little place there, and my husband decided while we were in Scarborough to go in and get his teaching degree, and he wanted to get into the North York school system, so for 1 year, he gave up his job to go to school at University of Toronto. So at that time, we had adopted our little girl. And she was about 4 years old at that time. And he gave up his job as an engineer, and he went to the university for 9 months.
To do what?
And he got his teaching certificate, and he taught hard to teach children, and then was at Danforth Tech for 23 years, and 2 years with hard to teach children, because Pete has a lot of patience.
Mm-hmm. And what was your little girl's name?
My little girl's name was Dove. It's spelled D-O-V-E, and it means Galupcha in Macedonian, and she's my Galupcha.
Mm-hmm. That's
Yeah.
a symbol of peace, too.
Symbol of peace. Exactly, symbol of peace.
Mm-hmm.
Because Kumathai said, Mary, put 3 names down on a piece of paper, and I'll tell you, you tell me which one you want for your daughter. And she let me have Dove. I wanted Dove. Because that was the symbol of peace, and it brought peace to Pete and I.
How old was she when you adopted her?
2.5 months.
Oh.
She was a tiny little, scrawly little baby.
Like all babies.
Like all babies.
Yeah. So when the church was built, what was your role?
My role in the church? I was a volunteer secretary there for about 5-6 years, and would go in the mornings. And then my daughter started school, and I had to be home for her a little bit more. And I sort of drifted away from that and stayed with my daughter for about 5 more years, and then we got involved in the church again, and then I was a paid secretary for a number of years.
At the church?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And it was a full-time 11, 12-hour job, and I just felt it was a little too much to take on with my family. And I thought there were more young people now around with more experience, and I sort of left and just drifted away from a paid job and landed up as a member on the board of directors for a number of years.
Weren't you the first president of the First Ladies Auxiliary there when it was first opened?
Yes, I was. That was another, the church was not open then. We were having meetings in the different houses of whoever would volunteer their home for a meeting. We'd have our meetings, and I got elected into the position as president of the Ladies Auxiliary. At that time, we had about 58 women in the Ladies Auxiliary. Could you believe? We had a strong force of women.
Mm-hmm. And they were all active?
They were all active, and we didn't have a place to meet. But when it came for the meet, everybody would show. And when a bazaar or a cake sale, we'd collect things, and we'd have them in different plazas. We happened to arrange them, New Year's parties, at different halls until the church got built.
Do you remember some of the ladies in that auxiliary at the beginning?
Oh, yes, I can remember many of them. There was Lefi Neshevich. Few of them have passed away. Petrinka, there was Zorka was active. Zorka Basil. Helen Stanwyck, and I should have the list in front of me. I can't remember the ladies' names, but there were many, many ladies involved. And there have been quite a few of them that have passed away. You must remember, I'm going to be 72 this year.
72.
72.
Kind of fly, doesn't it?
It flies, indeed it does.
There was a very important event that happened that I think that you were quite active in, and that was the earthquake in Skopje.
Yes, when the earthquake happened,
When was that?
July the 26th of 1963, and my parents presumably were in Macedonia at that time. And Pete and I got a call from the Toronto Star about 3 o'clock, 3:30 in the morning. It happened at 3:26 a.m. And we had the call at, no, it was 4:20. An hour later, the phone rang, and Pete and I were sound asleep. And they told me the earthquake had happened in Macedonia. Just think of how I jumped out of bed. Pete answered the phone, and he told me that, Mary, they've had an earthquake in Macedonia. And all I could think of were my parents. And
The Star called you?
yes, because our name was listed for some unknown reason for being a Macedonian representation for the community. The Macedonians and Pete and Mary Kondoff's phone number was at the Star. We ourselves don't know how come. However, I have the release the paper put out 4 or 5 days after the earthquake, which I will turn over to the library here. And it's been embossed in plastic because it's on both sides of the paper. And it'll remain as a memento here in the Resource Center. They told us that all the lines, all the telephone communications, everything was down. So we had no way, even through the Red Cross, of contacting Skopje at that time. And it was on the 11th day, according to my itinerary. Dad and Mom were there that day. But they left the day before to go to Sofia.
Holy cow, that ever
And
happened?
they just missed it because they were right in Hotel Macedonia, the one that was just swallowed up into the earthquake. I was very happy to hear from them. And after the only way I knew, the Red Cross didn't have anything yet. It's the 11th day, and then a postcard came on the 12th day from my dad. He was in the Soviet Union, and my mother was in Plovdiv, in Bulgaria. Mother had a sore back, and she didn't want to go on to Moscow with my dad.
Oh, I see.
Dad wanted to see Moscow. So he stayed there 5 days, and he went to Leningrad, and then came back to pick my mother up in Plovdiv. So he did see what he wanted to see.
Was he disappointed?
Not really. No, he came back very enthusiastic with what he had seen, especially their educational system and their hospitalization, because he went through hospitals. They took him through some of the hospitals, one in Moscow and one in Leningrad.
And what was your involvement in getting the people in Toronto and in Canada to help?
The earthquake, Zorka Basil was treasurer. I was the secretary of the Canadian Macedonian Earthquake Relief Committee. And Narmanar Nanda was also a great backbone for us to work with. He's a Macedonian who went to Switzerland to live, and I understand he's passed away since. But we held concerts at Massey Hall, and we had Ralph Beliska was a big entertainer in the city at the time, and we had the dance group from, they had a dance group at St. Clements, and they practiced somewhere else, but the church foundation was in at the time, but there was no roof. And the dancers came to Massey Hall. Alec Petlichkov, June Evans, Virginia Evans was in this dance group. I remember her dancing, and Alec Petlichkov was there. And the young girls of the dance group did such a fabulous job. And we had quite a full house, but not quite full. And we raised $3,500 that one night. And then we were at another concert at the Royal Palais, the dance hall in Sunnyside. We gave Palais Royal. We gave another concert there where we raised money.
What kind of concert? Who participated?
Oh, we had Juliet that night. Well, she was living in Toronto at the time, not in Vancouver, a singer. And we went after top-notch people who helped out for the earthquake, and we raised quite a bit of money that night. And the ambassador from Yugoslavia came from Ottawa for that concert. I remember that very well. Can't remember his name at the moment either. But
how much was totally raised? How much did the Canadian Macedonian send?
The earthquake committee had close to $70,000. And in 1963, $70,000 was a lot of money. It helped to buy equipment for the hospital in Skopje. And we did get a letter from them about 9 months later, because they were in such a disarray, but the money was received through the Red Cross.
Mm-hmm. Go back a little bit to some of the earlier days of the social part of Toronto when you were a young girl. In particular, your days at the club.
In particular, the days at the club.
And I just wanted to know what things you participated in there.
Well, we had choir practice and the choir.
Were you in the choir?
Yes, I'd go into the choir when I could.
What did you
because their days sometimes conflicted with my music lessons. And I was a soprano, would you believe?
Me too.
Soprano. And we had rehearsals with the orchestra. And Mr. Duffeff lectured to us quite a bit. Some of us were a little rowdy once in a while. But however...
But he taught you right from the beginning.
Yes, he did. I went personally to his home and to the conservatory for my lessons. But every weekend I spent with Mr. and Mrs. Duffeff. I never came home on weekends. I was like their daughter for about 5 years.
You mean you stayed at their house
I stayed at their house every Saturday and Sunday.
Oh.
And because Sika never had any children, and she always wanted me to stay there, which I did until I got into high school, homework developed, and so on. It kind of curtailed some of the activity there. However, the Andrew Christoph Club, we had some Bulgarians that were a minority in the club. Sometimes we had a little conflict there. However, it worked out favorably for all of us because we were not enough Macedonians, not enough Bulgarians to divide the group. We did stay together, and we did a publication from the club.
What kind of a publication?
And the publication was called, Mary Rizoff was the typesetter of the publication. She worked as a typesetter. I can't remember the name of the Andrew Christoph paper, I think. Andrew Christoph.
Who was Andrew
Youth Club.
Christoph?
Andrew Christoph was one of the men there who Andrew Christoph, you don't remember him?
No, who was he?
Oh, your mom would remember him. He was a very active member in the club and would teach us Bulgarian. He was more Bulgarian, and sometimes, pardon me, we would have conflict with who's Macedonian, who's Bulgarian, and some of them were intermarried with Bulgarian, Macedonian, vice versa. However, there was quite a group of young people, and our parents made picnics to help the youth get together, and it was out in the Humber River area where we had our picnics, and people would congregate like 500 to 800 people possibly at that time, and that was quite a few people for the 30s and the 40s when you stop to think about it.
And I remember that they had a lot of those long pictures of all those picnics.
Yes.
I think there was one every year.
There was one every year, and it was the fashionable thing. What were you going to wear as a young girl to the picnic, type of thing. We all, we had many memorable occasions, even at the picnic, and a lot of games were arranged for the young people. And of course, there was delicious food, Macedonian cooking, pita, watermelon. We all had a wonderful time at these picnics.
And what about the music?
And the music, the dancing, the oro. And at the last minute, people would be tramping down the grass so they'd make it smooth for dancing. I'll never forget some of the men and the women.
Do you remember the orchestra that we usually had?
Who was the orchestra at the time? Pasco played a few times.
Mircho
and Mircho, yeah,
clarinet.
He died not too long ago, didn't he, Mircho?
Yeah, it's about 10 years ago.
10 years ago, yeah. But
this group was the best with, I can't think of his name. Lazarov was his, I can't think of his name either, and he played the drums.
Danny? Danny? Not Danny.
No, his son Alec Lazarov is also a drummer too.
Oh, is he?
But he was the group, I can't remember. Anyway, they were the premier group that played at all the picnics.
Played at all the picnics.
I remember as a kid, and you were dancing and I was dancing.
Oh, we were really full of spirit at that time. The youth of today, I'm happy to say, are doing fantastically well here in the city of Toronto.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's nice to see them back again doing that.
Yes, they're to be commended.
Yeah. So the days of the club, is there anything else that you can remember?
I can't recollect the days at the club any more than what I've stated here. I do remember my going away party was at the club before Pete and I got married. Before I got married in Detroit. And it was the last thing we did, I think, at 386 Ontario Street. And Mr. Duffett was alive at that time.
He just died not too long ago.
Yeah, I know.
And, well, let's go back then. I think we ended before at the earthquake. After that was all done, there were other things that started in the Macedonian community. The church was starting to be...
It was flourishing.
Yeah, and more people were coming, more immigrants.
More immigrants were coming, and while I was there on the board of directors, we had a grievance committee at the church, which we tried to help newcomers when they would arrive. And it was a big assistance for newcomers coming here to Canada. Whereas they had nobody here. And when I think of my dad coming here alone, he had nobody and struggled to make his living, and he worked in the factories and dipping in the aluminum steel and making the steel pots and pans. Today, it's a little easier for immigrants coming because it's either a mother or a father or a son or an uncle that has support when they arrive, which you can kind of help to put in touch with or give them a few dollars on behalf of the church to get started.
Mm-hmm.
But today, I don't know whether the church is continuing with this or not. I don't know.
Well, they did it then, I guess, because there was a lot of immigrants coming at that time.
Mm-hmm.
But then wasn't there a radio program started?
Oh, then there was a radio program started in 69, 70, 71, and 2, a Radio Chin. We did that for a couple of years.
Who was we?
With Milja Nikolovsky. And it got off the ground, and today Dragica Belchevsky, she is handling the program very nicely.
Is this
the same one we started back in 69 and 70. It's the same.
You, what was your role in that?
Oh, I was producer of the program.
At the very beginning?
At the beginning. Mm-hmm.
And who else was?
And Milja Nikolovsky. We both talked and played records and spoke about Macedonian community happenings around the city and made announcements, etc. Same as Dragica is doing today, and doing a fabulous job. She's very, her expertise is...
You were doing it in Macedonian then?
In Macedonian and English. It was compulsory. I had to hand in 70% had to be in English.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
the other way around.
And 30% now, well, it was that way then. And it had to be all handed in, whatever I spoke about. And it had to be typewritten and handed in after every program.
After or
The
before?
government wanted it. Well, after the program was over, I
So it didn't have to be pre-approved?
No, no. But roughly we would take an estimate on feeling, well, 70% of it's in English. And now they can do it all in Macedonian.
No, I think they insist on it. They insist on most
yes,
of it being.
they do. So, well, times change, and like everything else,
And
time marches on.
Yes, it does. But you've been active in the Macedonian community most of your life,
Yes, I have, indeed. I've given up a great deal of my life for the Macedonians in Toronto, and there were times when a Macedonian from Macedonia would say to me, "What business have you to mix with the Macedonians here? You're a Canadian." And you know, there was nothing more that would hurt me when a person would say that to me, because I felt I had more rights than the person that came here. I'm born here. But it's in my heart to help the Macedonians.
Mm-hmm.
And same with Pete. He's helped a great deal. Both of us have done our share, but now we're both in our 70s, and it's time for us to take life a little easier. But I think it's getting a little harder with grandchildren.
Yeah, how many grandchildren do you have?
No, I have 2 grandchildren. They're 8 and 4.
And their names?
And their names are Jesse and Jason, and
They're both boys.
they're both boys, and they're good little children.
And any other Macedonian group that you joined, or?
Well, I I still am active with the Ukrainians at Club 626. I haven't been so for this 4 or 5 months lately, but I was. And when my husband was in teaching, I worked with the Teachers' Wives Association, and I had been secretary, treasurer, and once president of the association. But when you're younger, you can cope a little bit more and handle things that today I find a little difficult to get around to do what I used to do.
You were a daughter, a member of the Daughters of Macedonia?
And the Daughters of Macedonia, I'm a member there, as well as the last 5-6 years I've been volunteering my services at the North York General Hospital, and just received my 5-year pin in May. And I enjoy the ladies there, and every Monday I give every Monday to the hospital as a volunteer.
And you were also a member of the bowling league, I think, too.
Oh, yes.
You still bowl?
Yeah, I still bowl.
Macedonian Ladies Bowling League?
The Macedonian Bowling League, I'd like to mention to you, I've only been a member there 3 years, but this bowling league has been going for 42 years. Mm-hmm. And there are many a member there that are a lot older than I am. I may be one of the younger members in the league, and they're a lot better bowlers than I am. But however, they're a nice bunch of ladies. And
they've been bowling for those whole 42 years.
And they've been bowling, most of them. That's a long time, Virginia.
Yeah. And you're also a member of the latest group that your husband founded.
Oh, the Historical Society. That gave Pete a great deal of pleasure. He instigated it, and he just decided he was going to start it, and he did as much as he could, and I think it's getting off the ground now. And there's a lot of young people now that have the know-how to carry it on. Mm-hmm. They're more qualified than Pete and I are, and it's wonderful to see the activities that they are taking on and handling them very well.
Did we say at the beginning what the cellar your parents came from? I don't think we said that.
No, we didn't. I don't think we did.
What,
Mother and Dad.
Yeah, let's go back to them a bit.
I did forget.
Where was your father born?
Chris Vasilev was born in Selo Jupanischa in 1900, and my mother also was born in Jupanischa, that's Aegean, Macedonia, in 1903.
Where is that near? Is it related?
Near Kostursko Jupanischa, near Kostur.
Oh.
It's only about, well, I think it seemed like about 20 kilometers to me. I may be wrong, when we drove from Kostur to Jupanischa, because they have beautiful highways there. I was very surprised at their highways.
When did you?
1985, and it's just like 401.
Oh.
They've got 2 cars going and 2 cars coming, all paved, and it's a marked highway. It was beautiful. And we went to the Silo to see where my mom and dad were born. Well, there wasn't too much there. Because Gorno Jupanischa was all closed up and Dolnato was all developed. They had a coffee house and some nice houses made of brick, and a little road, a clean little road going up to the old Jupanischa on the hill. We also went to see my husband's village, Dumbany and Gabrish. And they were closed up tight. Things were boarded up there. Mm-hmm. It was sad to see, really.
I mean, there weren't even any Greeks living there?
No, there was nobody living there, Virginia. Further down the road, about 1.5 miles, there was a little old lady. She wanted to invite us for a cup of coffee, but you know, she must have been close to 100. You know, and she remembered Velika, my mother-in-law, in the village, and she pointed to the house, and she wanted to show the house to Pete where they were born.
And it's still standing?
And it's still standing, but boarded up. But nobody is living there. It's sad to see. And further up the hill, there was.
Well, are they still owned by the people who left them? Or, well, I can't imagine that there's just vacant land when there's so many people that would use the space.
I'm not qualified to answer that. I don't know. I really don't know. The places were boarded up, and we asked her, and she says the last 10 years. Well, my in-laws have been in America more than 10 years ago. They've been there 50, 60 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what happened there. As far as where my mother and dad lived, there was a new house built on the property, and some time ago, after my father died, Len and I were asked if we wanted to keep the property. It's about 1/2 acre of land.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother asked us because we got approached to sign it off. And Len and I said, Mom, we don't need the property. Why? We signed off on the property.
So it's sold?
So a second cousin of my dad's is actually living there and owns it.
Oh.
So we have no rights anymore. We signed it off when my father died. That was about 4 or 5 years after he died, because we got approached by the Greek consulate, if you will.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. If,
That's how it all came about.
So it's still in your family, though. It's not.
No, it's not.
Turned
It's
over
not.
to the Greek.
Well, they speak Greek there.
But I mean, it's not the Greek government that owns it. It's,
Oh
it's
no.
still in
Well,
your
it's
family.
in the family, but it isn't ours.
Yeah.
For my brother and I. Speaking of my brother.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think we've come pretty much to the end. Is there anything else that you want to tell us about?
I can't think of anything much more, other than to say it's nice to see that the communities are growing here in Toronto, and that we have a Canadian Macedonian place, and I'm very proud to see how the young people are taking over and looking after functions to maintain a good standard of living for the people here.
Well, Mary, it's been a real pleasant experience interviewing you, and I wish you a lot of good health and good luck. Thank you.
Thank you.